And I will hit admit all.
Mhm.
And I don't think we need to go over the meeting setup with you, Art. You're seeing plenty of them.
I'll just wait and take my cues from you all.
Yeah.
Okay, great, great. I'll show you where the wonderful. Welcome, everyone. People coming in. Well, my name is Lourdes Chamorro, and I'm president of the Entomological Society of Washington. And I welcome you to the 1227th meeting of the Society, today, March 3rd, 2022. And thank you for joining us. And again, this is such a great opportunity to have members of the Society from far away be able to join our meetings. Just a quick reminder that our meeting is being recorded, and in order to be uploaded to our YouTube channel. And so if you don't want to share your video, go ahead and turn that off, and your name won't appear, and you'll remain anonymous. And yeah, and this is a plug for our awesome YouTube channel, and Sockwash D.C., and you can see all of our past meetings. And that's been another benefit of having these type, our new platform, I guess, our new way of doing things. And then just because I can't ignore the fact that we are living in a very difficult time, and our friends and colleagues who are in Ukraine and Russia, our thoughts are with you guys. And just kind of thinking of all of you.
Unmute your speaker or increase volume. Oh.
Yeah, and just a reminder to remember to unmute yourselves. So, okay, so again, welcome everyone. It's great to see all the friendly faces, and we'll just move on. So we will go on and have Gary Hevel read the minutes and from last meeting.
President Lourdes Chamorro called to order the 1226th regular meeting of the Entomological Society of Washington on the 3rd of February 2022. 43 members and guests tuned in to the virtual meeting. Recording Secretary Gary Hevel read the minutes from the January meeting, and these were approved. President-elect Matt Buffington advised attendees on progress for the annual banquet. The Society has met at Wood End Sanctuary for many years, and that venue has been selected for the banquet. However, financial charges from Wood End have become excessive for evening reservations. This year, our event will be midday on 9th of June and will include student poster presentations and insect collecting opportunities. Membership and Communications Secretary Elizabeth Young announced that a male McCarthy Earl becomes an ESW member this evening, and that she has received a membership application from Joyce Gross. Elizabeth also reminded everyone that it is not too late to pay dues for 2022 memberships. President Chamorro noted that the Society is in the process of redesigning the website. For that effort, members are encouraged to provide images of insects, and these may be sent directly to her. Warren Steiner displayed a new book called The Big Trip by Donald Messersmith. The large volume includes biographical information on the author, but has limited content on entomology. Program Chair Alan Norbaum introduced the speaker for the evening, Dr. Will Kuhn from Discovery of Life, whose presentation title was Smokies, ATBI, a 23-year biodiversity inventory in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Dr. Kuhn described the park dimensions of 800 square miles and some 5,000 acres. It is a temperate rainforest, the only one in Eastern North America. In recent years, the park has suffered from drought, fires, and climate change. Serious collecting of the fauna and flora has occurred over many years, resulting in a present tally of over 21,000 species, including more than 1,000 species described as new to science. Present estimates of species range from 60 to 80,000 species. The park needs help from scientists to further investigate the biological diversity there and can accommodate interested parties with lodging within the park. Members expressed strong interest in this project. The meeting was adjourned at 8:15 p.m.
Great, thank you very much, Gary. Do we any corrections or additions or a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Yes, any second? Okay, I see. Thank you very much. Okay, oh, and I forgot to gavel our meeting. And the minutes are approved. Thank you very much, Gary.
Sure.
Okay. And now we move on to reports of officers and committees. And this I just kind of, it can be freewheeling. So if Matt, if you have any updates for us or any other members of the committee.
Hi, everyone. The banquet is now scheduled and contracts are signed. So there's no going back on this one. We're going to see what the daytime banquet has for us in store. And we'll take it from there. Should be a lot of fun.
Do you want to announce the date, Matt?
I have to look at my calendar real quick because I don't want to give the wrong date. Hold on.
Yeah, there'll be a flyer coming out, and we'll be doing a social media campaign for it. But it should be a lot of fun. We're considering maybe making T-shirts and the like because he's an illustrator, so we'll see. So is it June?
June the 9th.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Gary. So June 9th for the banquet, the annual banquet. So this is a very exciting time. And last year we had it a virtual event, a hybrid event where it was virtual and in person, and that worked out well. There were a few kind of issues, but we're going to try to work those out. So it was a really nice compromise. So we hope to do that again. And any other reports? Okay, maybe from the program chair, Al, for next meeting, did you want to give us an update on who it will be?
Sure. Our next meeting is April 7th, and the speaker is going to be Miles Zhang, who's a postdoc and a hymenopterist. I don't have a title yet.
Awesome. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to Elizabeth Young, and she will be introducing new members. And also, if you're a visitor, please feel free to unmute yourself and introduce yourself and say hello.
Thank you, Lourdes. Yes, so we have 2 new members that have submitted applications in February, or to announce today for our March meeting. Those are R.T. Curtis and Victor Holland. And our now official member, who was announced in February, is Joyce Gross. And as Laura said, if there are any visitors with us tonight, we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to unmute yourself and say hello.
Susan King, Newark, Delaware, American Entomological Society.
Great, welcome.
Thank you, Susan. Good to have you here.
Okay. Well, great, and also thanks to all our returning members who with familiar faces over and over again. Wonderful. Okay, we'll move. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that. We move on to any unfinished business, and there isn't any. So we'll go on to some new business. And in presentation of notes and exhibitions of specimens. Does anybody have something to share? Membership. Go ahead, Matt.
I have something to share. So I've been working with Smithsonian Exhibits on a temporary exhibit for the Vespa mandarinia, the Asian giant hornet, and we're getting into the building phase now. And I was really keen on getting additional specimens besides the single one that I had mounted up before. So I spent part of my day yesterday mounting these things from. They're all in alcohol. They're all rolled up. They turn into little balls. I'm used to dealing with 1 millimeter long wasps, and this was quite the challenge. So and they're all in slightly different poses, so we can put them actually on the log or on the nest, and they'll actually look like they were maybe kind of walking there. So a nice way to spend an afternoon.
I've also been noticing the chat, and it's been some discussion about BioEquip going out of business, right? And this is something that a lot of us who depend on BioEquip for our equipment are maybe looking for new places to get our equipment. And actually, for our new website, it might be a good place to put some of these resources. And yeah, definitely John Hawk, if somebody hasn't mentioned that. And I have a couple that I was trying to find the names for. One is in Japan, so it's a little bit far, obviously far, and but it's called Mushisha, and they have absolutely fantastic entomological equipment like nets and aspirators and the like. But there's also a French company that I've bought some traps from, and they're actually quite good, very, very good traps. And I can put together a list, and also if there are other individuals who have some suggestions for other places where they obtain their entomological equipment, then we can start making a list of those and making them available to the membership. Okay. So that's it for
Gary's got something.
oh, who's that? Oh, okay.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. The latest volume of the Mona series, the Moths of North America, has just come out. This is part 2 of the Notes d'Antiquité, and includes everything you want to know, possibly more than you want to know, about this family of insects. The authors, as you may not be able to see, are familiar to us: Jim Miller, David Wagner, Paul Oppler, and J. Donald LaFontaine. It's dated 2021. They had some difficulty on getting the volume out, per usual things now. Anyway, I won't even open it up. There's beautiful volumes, images in the volume, and they described 15 new species. So that's the book of the year so far.
Great, great. And how did you get that one, Gary?
Oh, I subscribe to the series generally. It's costing, I think I could buy another house in place of the volumes that I received, but it's well known to lepidopterists at least, and I got in on it early and have most of the volumes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And again, for the next meeting, if you have something that you would like to share please don't be shy. And, and people always want to hear what's going on. That's the goal of the society, right? Okay, so now I'm going to pass it on to Al, our program chair, to present our topic.
Okay, hello again. Just remind everybody, try to keep your microphones muted unless you are going to say something. We have at least 42 participants tonight. There's 41 connections, and I can see at least Warren and Jill are sharing one screen there. So it's a pretty nice turnout. And I remember at the end of the talk, if you'd like to comment or ask questions, use the raise hand feature under reactions down at the bottom of your screen, the Zoom screen. And now I have the pleasure to introduce Art Evans, who is a longtime member of the Society, probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but Art is an author, photographer, lecturer, radio broadcaster, and videographer. He teaches entomology courses at Randolph-Macon College and the University of Richmond. And he's also a research associate at the Smithsonian, the Virginia Natural History Museum, and the California State Collection of Arthropods. He's authored or co-authored 30 peer-reviewed papers on the systematics and biology of beetles and other insects, as well as over 140 popular articles and books on insects and spiders. His books include the National Wildlife Foundation Field Guide to Insects and Spiders of North America, Beetles of Eastern North America, National Geographic Backyard Guide to Insects and Spiders of North America, and Beetles of Western North America. His next book, The Lives of Beetles, will be published this year by Princeton University Press. He's currently a managing editor for Beetles of Canada in the United States, an identification manual scheduled for publication in 2026. Welcome, Art.
Well, thank you. I'll go ahead and share my screen here and get this show on the road. All right. Let me get rid of this too. There we go. Well, you've heard all of my qualifications for being here tonight, so I'll skip this slide altogether. Get my cursor in the right place. There we go. I'm very fortunate to wear many hats as an entomologist. I do a wee bit of research when I have time, but I do quite a bit of teaching and public speaking. And as was mentioned earlier, had a long-running radio program on local NPR that aired during Morning Edition called What's Bugging You? And I had a lot of fun with that. And we just turned it into a short video series too. Tonight, I'd like to share with you my most recent book, Beetles of Western North America, published by Princeton University Press. This is covers 1,428 species and all 131 families that are known to occur west of the Continental Divide. It includes an illustrated key to the most commonly encountered beetle families, their family diagnoses, species accounts, and current information on distribution, biology, and taxonomy that you usually don't find in popular works. This book would be impossible were it not for the very generous photographers, nearly 120 of them that contributed to the 1,500 images that make up this book. I photographed roughly half of those images, and the rest were all supplied by these people here. So if any of you are out in the audience and see your name, thank you so much. If any of these are good friends of yours, colleagues, family members, be sure to mention that you saw their name in this presentation. I'd appreciate it. I'm very grateful to them for making this book what it is. I also want to give a shout out to my good friend Jen Reed in Ontario, Canada. Jen's retired with the Canadian National Collection, and she is a whiz at making illustrations and making each and every photograph look its absolute best. She generated a number of original illustrations for the book, and I'm very much grateful to her help and support through this project, as I was through Beetles of Eastern North America. This book, Beetles of Western North America, covers North America west of the continental divide. And even though I made sure there were a couple of Alaskan specialties in the book primarily covers a selection of beetles from southern British Columbia to southern California and southeastern Arizona. I'd just like to share with you for a few moments some of the features of the book. It has an extensive introduction to beetles that covers their morphology, and also a nice plate spread of beetle larvae. I don't go into much depth about larvae. They deserve their own book, and I'm not qualified to write that at the moment. That would be quite a task, taking on a larval field guide, and I'm not sure I could find a publisher that would take that on, but I still think it would be an interesting project. But I think this spread here gives a pretty good idea as to the diversity of larval forms of beetles here in Western North America. I also have sections on behavior and natural history, including their mating behavior, parental care. And also, I got to include some recent research by some friends of mine, including Anna Holden. Anna Holden and her colleagues found a cache of arthropod fragments inside the skull of a 40,000-year-old camel skull at La Brea tar pits. And these fragments also were of the same age, and for the most part, they include modern species. And what was interesting about her research, one of the many things about this research is that it sort of establishes that the Los Angeles basin was much drier than we had thought, based previously on plant fragments. And one of the particularly interesting things to me was this particular little beetle bit right here, which is a checkered beetle, Necrobia. And it turns out that Necrobia, this particular species, its name eludes me at the moment, I hate this. This particular species was thought to be a Palearctic species that was introduced after the colonization of North America. In fact, there was some suspicion it might have been introduced by the Spanish on the West Coast. But the fact that remains of this beetle were found, 40,000-year-old remains of this beetle were found, it's clear that this beetle was here before the European colonization. And so whether this beetle is whole Arctic in distribution, or it actually originated here in North America and then was subsequently introduced into Europe, remains to be seen. I'm a big proponent of collecting beetles and making collections. I think that is an incredibly important part of learning about beetles. And so there's a lot of information on different techniques used to collect beetles. And I got some friends of mine to pose doing exhibiting different beetle collection methods. On the far left is my good friend Dave Carlson. He's got a couple of pool nets strapped to a bridge over a flume in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Some of you might be familiar with this technique. There's a lot of flotsam and jetsam flowing along these streams, including beetles and other insects that are seldom collected. And I'd always wanted to do this. And in 2018, he took me to the spot and we spent an afternoon working this flume, and it was just fascinating. I'm sure many of you recognize next to him, Matt Gimmel from the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. Matt introduced to me this very simple technique of just walking around all the time with a light colored tray or a pan and using it to carefully sort through handfuls of rotting wood, leaf litter, moss, or using it as a beading tray. And up to that point, I had never even considered using that before. It's a very versatile thing. So it's now a regular feature in my shoulder bag. And my good friend Bob Anderson is demonstrating how to sift leaf litter for beetles and many other families of beetles and arthropods. This was taken during the Weevil workshop at the Southwest Research Station back in, I think, 2013, 2014. And on the far right is my good friend Chris Worth. Chris Worth is at Purdue with Aaron Smith, and he's inspecting a blacklight setup. This is a commercially available, or was a commercially available setup through BioQuip. And the design of this setup was based on a design that Alex Reifschneider and I had put together many years ago, and BioQuip made many improvements to it over the years. On the left is Ron McPeak chasing beetles around some pine slash up in Oregon. And then to the right is Ted McCrae, who's demonstrating how to use a net handle as a beating stick and looking for beetles that way. So these are just some of the techniques that are featured in the introductory material of Beetles of Western North America. Traps are an important way to collect specimens too. In the upper left, this is a trap that was proposed by Bill Warner in Arizona, and it's called the V-fit trap, or the V-shaped flight intercept trap. And it consists of a sheet of heavy plastic that's suspended between two sets of poles. And then there's collection trays in the bottom that have polyethylene glycol for preserving and capturing specimens. And the material that these traps pick up is just absolutely mind-boggling. The amount of material and also the quality of material. And in Arizona alone, this trapping method has turned up many new country records and also numbers of specimens of species that are seldom collected. Over here is a 2-liter soda bottle with the top cut off right at the shoulders, and then the neck is cut off, and that small section is inverted like a funnel and then suspended with a wire, and you can place whatever your favorite bait happens to be. Here is chopped up bananas. This is something I started playing around with when I was a student in South Africa, and I found it to be a very successful trapping method. On a lark, I was walking through Lowe's one day, and I saw these corncob feeders. It's very stout spring steel, and what you do is you take dried corn cobs and just stick them down inside and hang them up. And I thought, what a great way to collect beetles and other insects. So I took a couple of these to Arizona a few years ago and just stuffed them with rotting bananas and oranges. And they did amazingly well, but you have to keep up with them. On the lower left, I don't want to forget this one. This is another Bill Warner special. This is just simply called Poop on a Stick. And all you need are some plastic bowls, a little bit of preservative, and just take your favorite brand of feces and schmooze it on the end of a stick, suspend it over the bowl, and within hours, if you're in a good spot, the beetles will come and they'll be there waiting for you. The book also includes an illustrated key and guide to the most commonly encountered beetle families in Western North America. As one of the 3 co-managing editors of the upcoming Beetles of Canada in the United States, believe you me, the keys in that work are going to be much more detailed than this. And to come up with a key that would allow someone to place every beetle they collected in Western North America to family is a very tall order. So what I attempted to do here is key out beetles, the more commonly encountered ones, and that would dump you into piles, if you will, of families. Then you could go to that section of the book and see how your specimen compares to the images in that family section. The heart of the book are the species diagnoses, and each family includes a short introduction to the family, a pronunciation guide, a brief diagnosis of the family. There's also tips for distinguishing this particular family from similar beetles, and also collecting notes as well. And then there's a note for the North American fauna that gives you information on the number of species and the number of genera that occur in the United States and Canada. And then each species includes information on diagnostic features and its distribution within the study area. At the end of each species diagnosis is a number in parentheses, and that indicates the number of species in that genus west of the continental divide. And this was intended to let people know that there's either a really good chance that if the number's low, that their beetle in hand is the one that's photographed here. But if the numbers are high, that's to serve as a warning that you need to do more work and probably have to do dissections and refer to generic monographs in order to reliably identify a particular beetle to species. I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of beetle study in Western North America. If there were a Mount Rushmore-like monument to the most important coleopterists who worked on the Western fauna, say using Mount Whitney and its surrounding peaks as a base, it might look something like this. Topping this list is John Lawrence LeConte. He was one of the most eminent entomologists of the 19th century. LeConte collected extensively in California, from San Francisco to San Diego, and he was a pioneer in the higher classification of North American beetles. His good friend and collaborator, George Horne, arrived in California during the Civil War, and he collected beetles throughout the state, spending a considerable amount of time around Fort Tejon, the Owens Valley, down in San Diego, as well as parts of Arizona and Nevada. And upon LeConte's death in 1883, Horne became the preeminent coleopterist in North America. Thomas Lincoln Casey, I'm sure, is known to many of you. He collected beetles extensively in California in the mid-1880s and secured a wealth of material. Over his 40-year career, he described nearly 10,000 new species, and many of them today are considered to be synonyms, and much of his work has been criticized because of this. However, for some of the groups of smaller beetles that he worked on, many of his species concepts appear to have held up. But he was an incredibly productive yet controversial worker, but there's no ignoring his contribution to the Western beetle fauna. I have to say my favorite among these is Henry Clinton Fall. Fall was amateur, started out as an amateur entomologist. He became particularly interested in beetles at an early age and started collecting beetles, but it wasn't until a visit by George Horne in 1893 that Fall was inspired to publish his first paper. And that paper just happened to be on the beetles of the southern Sierra Nevada, which we know now today as the San Bernardino Mountains Transverse Ranges. He had amassed one of the largest private beetle collections of the day. It contained 200,000 specimens representing nearly 20,000 species. And his collection now resides with those of LeConte and Horne at the Museum of Comparative Zoology. Edwin Vandijk was an outstanding authority on beetles of the Pacific states. He was also an expert on forest pests and the distribution of insects, especially beetles in Western North America, and he published several papers on the topic. He was known to be an inspirational teacher. His collection of 200,000 beetles was presented to the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco in 1924, which was no small gesture because much of the collection had been destroyed just a few years before in the fires that came after the San Francisco earthquake. Frank Blasdell was born in New England, but his family moved to San Diego early on. And after establishing a practice in Northern California, Blasdell retired and dedicated his time to studying darkling beetles, Tenebrionidae, and soft-winged flower beetles in the family Meliridae. And his collection, too, was donated to the California Academy of Sciences. In the beginning of my book, as a dedication to all the people that were significant influences in my life, especially as an entomologist and budding coleopterist. Working on a beetle on Western North America had me reminiscing a lot about how I got started and my path to writing this book, and that's what I'd like to share with you now. This book is dedicated to my parents, Ed and Lois Evans. They took me on many field trips throughout Southern California. We were members of the Kern Antelope Historical Society. We went on weekend trips to visit old ghost towns, gold mines, Indian paintings, rock paintings, all over Southern California. And that really helped spur my passion for insects. I was very lucky to have two great biology teachers in high school, Bob Brister and Mike Hanlon. They team taught a field biology course between my junior and senior years in high school, which remains today one of the best courses that I've ever taken, high school or university. And it was a real thrill to me. Bob Brister is still with us, and he's a friend of mine on Facebook, and it was a real thrill for me to send a copy of this book to him. Bob Duff, who sadly passed away last year, I met him at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles, and from that he invited me on several trips around Southern California and Nevada and exposed me to the incredible diversity of beetles in Western North America. And it's Bob who spurred my interest in scarab beetles in particular. Charlie Hogue, who many of you knew, was the curator at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles, where I worked as a student worker for several years. Charlie was a prolific researcher, but he had a great interest in public education and writing popular books. And he was a great inspiration to me, although that seed didn't germinate until long after he had passed. My major professor, Elbert Sleeper at Cal State Long Beach, provided me with the academic foundation for everything I've done with the Coleoptera ever since. And of course, my good friend and colleague, Chuck Bellamy, who many of you knew, accompanied me on many field trips throughout the West and of course in Southern Africa too. And of course, finally, but last but not least, my wife, Paula, has made all things possible for me entomologically these past 20 years. This is a photograph that my dad took of me not far from June Lake in the Sierra Nevada at the tender age of 14. This is my very first insect net made from a broom handle, a coat hanger, and a cheesecloth bag complete with corners. And yes, it was a bear trying to get valuable specimens out of those sticky corners. From 1970 to 1973, I was a member of 4-H. I don't know how many of you are 4-H members out there or were. My family didn't have goats, chickens, guide dogs, or any of the rest, but I had an insect collection, and none of the adults involved in my 4-H club were comfortable with their knowledge of insects, so I became the de facto leader of the group. And we had a demonstration one day where everybody brings their animals and their projects to the community building and puts them on display for everybody to see. And while everybody was outside with their animals, I sat by myself with a card table with my 3 cigar boxes filled with all the specimens I had at the time. And this gentleman walked in and introduced himself to me as Chris Henney. Now, at the time, I didn't know who Chris Henney was, but he mentioned people he had worked with, John Comstock and Lloyd Martin, who I had heard of, very well-known lepidopterists in Southern California. Turns out Chris Henney was a preparator at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles for a few years after the war, and had since then taken it upon himself to study the life histories of the moths and butterflies of Southern California, all of which he reared at home. He invited me to his home, and this was the first time I had seen a beautifully curated collection. He had his own rearing room with caterpillars and host plants. And even though I was leaning heavily toward beetles at this time, that experience was a real inspiration to me. And I should mention too, is that because of his contacts with the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles, he set up a visit for my 4-H group. And it was at that first visit that I met the curators at the Natural History Museum, Hymenopterist Roy Snelling, Lepidopterist Julian Donahue, and of course, Dipterist Charlie Hogue. And all of these people would have a tremendous influence on me after high school. The summer the summer after I graduated high school, I was hired as a student worker, and I worked at the Natural History Museum for several years, not only in entomology, preparing specimens and leading public tours and that sort of thing, and assisting the curators, but I also worked at the La Brea tar pits too at that time as a tour guide. I mentioned my high school teachers, Bob Brister and Mike Hanlon. Again, they taught this fantastic field biology class during the summer. We had 2 field trips every week. One was an overnight trip. The other one was a day trip. We went all over Southern California. We visited several museums. We had to make a plant collection. We had to make an insect collection. We had to prepare study skins of mammals and birds. We did vegetation mapping. I mean, this was a very intense course, and it's had a lifelong impact on me. I mentioned that I met Bob Duff at the museum in 1972, and from 72 to 78, Bob and I went on a number of field trips throughout Southern California, as far east as Western Texas. And it was during these trips that I became very interested in beetles and scarabs in particular. Through Bob, I was introduced to Elbert Sleeper at Cal State Long Beach. And I figured that once I had finished my associate's degree, I would enter there as a entomology student for a bachelor's degree program. And I was enrolled there. And just the summer before my first semester, I was in Madera Canyon at Arizona, southern Arizona, blacklighting one night. And this guy came out of the shadows and introduced himself to me as Chuck Bellamy. And that was the very beginning of a 35-year friendship and many, many field trips on 2 continents. Chuck is the one that got me to South Africa. He was invited to study there by Eric Holm to pursue work on the study of buprested beetles. And immediately Chuck began to lobby to have me come over there and join him. In the upper left here, you see, here we go. This is Clark Skoltz, who was a student of Eric Holm's. He became a professor at the University of Pretoria, and he was looking for his first doctoral student, which just happened to be me. And this was our photograph taken on our first field trip to Malawi. Most of my peers cut their teeth in the tropics in southern Mexico, Costa Rica, and Panama. I didn't. My first time in the tropics was in Central Africa, and it was quite an experience. On the right is a good friend of mine who I haven't seen in many years. This is Marcus Byrne. He's at the professor at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. Some of you might be familiar with Marcus's beautiful, wonderful TED Talk, The Dance of the Dung Beetles, the same title as his book. And it was his team that looked at how dung beetles navigate using celestial bodies in the sun. Some really interesting research. Much to my regret, and I have few regrets that I'm willing to admit out loud, when I was in Southern Africa, I was only interested in scarabs. If the beetle didn't have lamellate antennae, I couldn't have cared less. I did collect beetles for other people, other groups, for people that I knew were interested. But to this day, I wish I had collected everything. But I certainly got a very good feel for the scarab fauna of Southern Africa. In my last days in South Africa, something began to change in me. I was doing a lot of interesting research. I was revising genera of melilonthine scarabs, which is still of interest to me today. But I began to become more interested in informal science education. I thought it was important that more people became familiar with insects, and I looked for opportunities to share my passion for insects and entomology. And it just so happened that Charlie Hogue offered me a job as a technician in entomology when I returned to the United States while I was looking for a place to work, either at a university lab or I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do at the time. the museum had just received a $2 million grant to build the fourth insect zoo in the United States. I know insect zoos don't seem like a big deal anymore because they're everywhere, but at the time, there were only 3 insect zoos, one at the Smithsonian, the other at the Cincinnati Zoo, and the other at the San Francisco Zoo. And here was an opportunity to build from the ground up the 4th insect zoo in the United States. And at first I thought, no way, I'd give me a dead pinned insect any day. Keeping them alive and on display, that's hard work. But I literally woke up one night and thought I could do this. And I began to lobby everyone in the museum that I was the person for this job. And ultimately they did hire me as the director of the insect zoo. And that's where I worked for 10 years. And not only did I help maintain a collection of 75 different species of arthropods for display, but I also developed what I call a cradle to grave education program for insects. We had a traveling zoo that went out to schools and summer camps, libraries. I developed teacher programs where we encouraged teachers to incorporate insects into their curricula, and helped to kickstart the very young at that time insect fair, which is still one of the largest insect public events in Southern California. It was during my time at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles that I was approached by a publisher to write a popular book about beetles. And I immediately agreed and then went into a panic. I was just sort of getting started in my career, and I thought this is the kind of book that a mid-career or late career entomologist does, not when they're getting started. And so in my panic, I thought, misery loves company. Who could I suck into this project? And sure enough, it was Chuck. Unfortunately, Chuck had just signed on to return to South Africa. And so we never had the opportunity to work on the book together in the same room. There was this newfangled communication that was just starting to become used called electronic mail. And so we would exchange chapters back and forth, and that became an inordinate fondness for beetles. Just at the end of my career at the Natural History Museum, I was invited to write the Melanothine section for Volume 2 of American Beetles, which is the identification hand guide for United States and Canada. This is the book that I'm now one of the co-managing editors that we're doing the reboot of. Also during this time, I was invited to write a chapter on beetles for inclusion in natural history of the Sonoran Desert that was jointly published by the University of California and the Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum. And at the book launch for this book, I just happened to meet the acquisitions editor for University of California Press, and they had just acquired the softcover rights for An Inordinate Fondness for Beetles. And she approached me and said, "So what's your next book?" And I just blurted out, "I want to do a book on California beetles." And she said, "Well, send me something." So I did. I had this idea that I wanted to do a handbook of California beetles, and they thought that what I was proposing was actually 2 books. The complication at this time was I had just moved to the East Coast. Timing is everything, and here I am launching into a West Coast book. But fortunately, Charlie's son, Jim Hogue, was very interested in the project. We're good friends. He's a superb photographer and illustrator and a very knowledgeable entomologist and enthusiast of beetles. And so we joined forces and produced these 2 books. In 2000, I moved to Virginia, where I pursued working on a number of different projects. I continued my research in melanothines when I had time. And also, as I said earlier, I developed a radio segment on Richmond Public Radio called What's Bugging You? And that ran for 10 years. And then we turned bits of that into an animated series. Also, I teach at 3 universities here, entomology, medical entomology, and for non-science majors, I teach a course called Insects and Humans. It was during this time that I was approached to write a book about beetles of Eastern North America by the acquisitions editor at Princeton University Press. And the Western book that I'm sharing with you today is the companion volume to this book. It covers just over 1,400 species, and it's very similar in format to the Western book. I began photographing beetles for the Western book in 2010. In fact, from 2010 to 2018, I made 6 trips to the West Coast, and I drove about 8,000 miles to photograph beetles for the Western book. Now, I hadn't received a go-ahead to write a Western book. In 2010, I was still trying to finish the beetles of Eastern North America, and I had my doubts at times that I was ever going to be able to finish the darn thing. But after 7 years, I finally did. And I was working in real time, emailing the index back and forth to folks in England as we were sorting out those last pages. And I was up till 4:30 in the morning doing this. And I finally got to sleep, and I woke up at 11 o'clock, and I was wound up, and yet I was too tired to do anything meaningful. And I thought, I've got to do something. And I thought, I know, I'll draft a proposal to do Beetles of Western North America. And within 2 weeks, I had provisional approval to start that book. For those of you that are photographers in the audience, I have to say that I am an entomologist that knows how to take a certain kind of picture that works really well, what I call a field guide shot. I remember when I just started getting into insect photography and I was just starting to get the hang of things, I attended a conference where Mark Moffat was the keynote speaker. And when I saw his pictures, I was very depressed for several days, because Mark is not just a photographer, he's an artist. And so I had never aspired to be that level of photographer. In fact, I got to travel with Mark a little bit in South Africa and watched him work, and understood right away why I would never be that kind of photographer. I'm too lazy. Mark works really hard to get the images that he makes, and I'm just not willing to carry all that stuff around with me and just wait for that right shot. I'm more of a snap and shoot kind of guy, but I've learned to work with this equipment. I have a Canon EOS 7D and a 100mm macro lens. This isn't one of the newer lenses that has the stabilization feature, so I have to be as steady as I can possibly be. And I use the macro twin light. And as many of you know, working with these various types of macro lights, diffusion is critical. And I played around with a number of different diffusers over the years, but I found that this particular set of diffusers works really well. And it's adapted for the macro twin light by Canon, and I've been very pleased with it. So you can check it out at macrodiffuser.com. Again, I'm not the kind of photographer that likes to play around with light and experiment with this combination and that combination. I just want to get a camera that will allow me to take the pictures I want 90% of the time, and I'm happy with it. A lot of the work that I did was in Arizona's Sky Islands. There's approximately 55 Madrean Sky Islands that are scattered in southwestern United States and northwestern Mexico. Some of these mountain ranges are very familiar to some of you, I'm sure, the Babaquivris, the Chiricahuas, Huachucas, Santa Catalinas, Santa Ritas, and so on. And this part of the world is known as a biodiversity hotspot. The whole idea of Sky Islands, the idea was first coined by Weldon Heald in 1951 in an article that he wrote of the same name in Natural History magazine. Later, he wrote a book called Sky Island, and later it was retitled and reprinted as the Chiricahua Mountains. If you've never read this book, I suggest that you do, especially if you enjoy that part of the world, because it's a wonderful human and natural history of this mountain range. But it was a particular interest to me at the very end. The Healds were getting ready to move back to the city. They were getting older. They decided they needed to get back closer to civilization. And they had this beautiful ranch in Cave Creek They had just announced, or they were just getting ready to sell their property when this gentleman walked up their driveway and introduced himself as Mont Kazir. And he told them that he was looking for a place to establish a research facility for the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And to make a long story short, it's the Heald's Ranch that became the Southwest Research Station, the swimming pool, that house that's right there, that's where they lived. The reason that the Sky Islands are of great interest to biogeographers is because of the number of biotic influences. You've got the Sonoran Desert from the west, the Rocky Mountains and Colorado Plateau from the north. You've got influences of the Great Plains and the Chihuahuan Desert coming in from the east. And then, of course, you've got neotropical elements and taxa that are found in the Sierra Madre Occidental. All these different influences collide in southeastern Arizona, southwestern New Mexico. Which brings me to one of my next projects with Margarita Brummerman. As I was finishing the Beetles of Western North America, I knew that Margarita had been working on the Arizona beetles. She had been photographing every beetle she could get her hands on from southeastern Arizona. And when I told her I was going to do a Western book, her shoulders just fell. And I assured her that I couldn't possibly do justice to Arizona. Yes, there would be coverage in Arizona because it's west of the Continental Divide, but there's no way I could give the Arizona beetle fauna its due. And after some discussion, we agreed to work together and publish a field guide on the beetles of Arizona. And once we did, she decided to expand the project from southeastern Arizona to include the entire state. And pretty soon we went from 1,000 species to right now it's over 2,300 species and 83 families, all in beautiful color photographs. This is a sample of one of the plates here. And as I started assembling the captions for all of these plates, it dawned on me we really don't have a book on Arizona. What we really have is a book on the beetle fauna of the Southwest. And when I say Southwest, what I really mean is the North American Southwest. In other words, the American Southwest and Northwest of Mexico. And so we've begun to retool the book with this greater geographic range in mind. We still don't have a publisher yet, but we hope to soon. And now I just want to wrap things up with some of the my favorite photographs that I took while I was working on beetles of Western North America. One of my favorite insects when I visit southern Arizona are the whirlygig beetles, especially Dinutus sublineatus. This is a sort of a lone warrior in slow-moving pools along streams. You don't find them in mass swarms like you do Gyrinus. I've always been fascinated by this beetle. When I was a youngster at 4-H summer camp, I remember I stepped out of my cabin one day and I saw this beetle churning through the air. It was like a truck in low gear. And I just happened to be able to reach out and grab it. And it had a horn on its head. And I had no idea what it was at the time. And it looked a lot like some of the Bastricid beetles that I had collected, although I didn't know what Bastricid beetles were at the time either. But I had them all lumped together in my cigar box. And it was only when I attended Cal State Long Beach that I realized what I had was a horned stag beetle, Cynodendron rugosum. And the larvae of Cynodendron occupy very wet, rotten trees, down logs. In fact, it's not uncommon to find logs that are just sticking out of a stream in a cool, shady canyon to find hundreds of these beetles and their larvae just riddling the rotten wood. And of course, one of the red badges of courage in Western North America are the rain beetles, Pleiocomidae. There's only one genus known, Pleiocoma. The males are fully winged. The females are wingless. The females come up to the entrance of their burrows, release a pheromone, and the males use their elaborate lamellate antennae to pick up those pheromones. These beetles are a challenge to collect because depending on the species and what part of the West Coast you're on, their flights are triggered by precipitation, and that can be either late fall rains in October and November to melting snow as late as January and February. And many of them are found in very remote places. Others are commonly attracted to storefront lights in mountain communities. Scarabs, of course, are my favorite, and no book on Western North American beetles would be complete without photographs of all 3 species of Chrysina that occur in the Southwest. Chrysina byeri, the adults feed on the oaks of leaves, whereas Chrysina gloriosa is associated with junipers, and Chrysina leconti, the adults are feeders on pine. And the horn beetles are always crowd pleasers, Dynastes granti. Notice that spelling with the 2 I's. For many years, people have been misspelling the specific epithet, including myself. But Brett Ratcliffe, in his latest book with Ron Cave, The Dynasty of Canada and the United States, finally made it clear that we have to follow those original spellings. Those are the rules. And then the ox beetle, Stratega soloius, which is found across southern United States to southeastern Arizona and goes all the way down to South America. And I was sort of thinking a lot about Chuck too as I was assembling the Buprestids section. I wish I'd paid more attention to Buprestids when Chuck was around. But they were certainly fun to collect and a challenge to photograph for this work. The elaterids, the click beetles, there are several really large showy species that occur in the West, especially in Arizona, where there are a number of species of Calculopitius. Some of them are brilliant metallic colors as a result of shiny scales on their cuticle. Also fascinating are the net-winged beetles. These soft-bodied beetles are aposematically colored, and they are members of Müllerian mimicry complexes. And then, of course, there are, because they are all chemically defended. And then there are other insects and beetles, too, that resemble lycids, but they're not in Müllerian mimicry complexes, but Batesian mimicry complexes, because they themselves are trying to fool you into thinking that they are distasteful like their noxious models, the lycids. When I was growing up, I knew nothing about fireflies, the lampreyrids. One of the exciting things about living on the East Coast is that I have fireflies in my front yard. I still get excited about seeing them every year. But as I began doing field work in Southern California, I discovered that we had lampreyrids in Southern California too. Many of them don't bioluminesce, but some of them do. And one of the ones that's very commonly distributed around the Los Angeles basin is known as the pink glowworm. And this is because the larviform females glow and are often seen in the foothill areas and also along the walkways of some very well-known outdoor venues in the fringes of Los Angeles basin, such as the Greek Theater. And the photograph that's on the far right is of a pink glowworm that's being mobbed by 3 males. When I just started doing macro photography, I was very lucky to stumble upon a place where pink glowworms were very common, and they were there with the males. And I was thrilled to finally get this photograph in a book after almost 35 years. Speaking of bioluminescent beetles, the phengodids are really interesting beetles. The males look like soft-bodied beetles. They have bipectinate antennae, very distinctive sickle-shaped mandibles. The larvae and larviform females have rows of lights along the side of their bodies. The larvae are millipede predators. And they will run along the side of a millipede and then hurl or throw a coil of their body in front of the millipede, stop it in its tracks, and then they go up underneath its head and bite it and disable the millipede and then begin feeding on the internal tissues and organs of that millipede. The Southwest is teeming with tenebrionids of all kinds. When I was growing up in the 4th and 5th grade, I was always bringing beetles home in my Superman lunch pail. And one of those beetles that I was always collecting was Hydrodes ventricosus. These are small, very hirsute tenebrionids that came out early in the season. So when there was still a bit of a chill in the air in late February and March, they would come out. The death ghost beetles, the death fainters, Asbolus verrucosus, are covered with a waxy coating. They're known for thanatosis, feigning death. And this is a very popular species in insect zoos because they're very hardy, easy to keep, and long-lived. And I certainly had a colony of them going for several years. Blister beetles have always fascinated me, in part because they're really interesting, and also in part because one of the very first coleopterists I ever met was John Pinto at the University of California at Riverside. I was attending a 4-H conference at the University of California at Riverside, and I ditched the conference and went over to the entomology department. And I just walked in the very first door that was open, and it was John Pinto's. And he was nice enough to stop what he was doing and give me a tour. And I've always remembered that. And John was very helpful for the meloid section of this book. Erytilids, I'm just fascinated by blue insects. I don't think we get enough blue insects. And this Cypheratylus californicus is a real crowd pleaser, I think. And just because of its name, don't think it's found anywhere near California. This is one of those weird instances where the name tells you nothing. This is a species that's found in the Sky Islands, but also through the Southern Rockies as well, and further south into Mexico. Their larvae are very conspicuous. They're black and spiny, and you'll find them on overhanging trees, logs, feeding on fungus, and they pupate at the very ends of their old larval exoskeletons. And it's not unusual to find masses of them suspended underneath an inclined log. Longhorn beetles are always a popular thing with collectors. I grew up with California prionis, very widespread beetle. My dad put in a mercury vapor light, street light on our garage wall specifically to attract insects for me. And these were very common in the juniper pinyon woodland where I grew up. On one of my trips to Arizona, I found one of these predaceous longhorn beetles, Elytroleptus, which they mimic lysid beetles. And it turns out lysid beetles are also their prey. For years, I've searched mating masses of lysid beetles, hoping to find one of these cerambicids, a sort of a wolf in sheep's clothing, if you will, lurking around, but never have. I just happened to find these beetles attracted to some galls that were growing on the involucres of oaks, and a lot of insects were attracted to some sort of a sweet fluid associated with the galls. And finally, the weevils. I've become a real fan of weevils as of late through my friendship with Bob Anderson, who's been very kind to go through my entire collection and identify my weevils, and late night photographs when I'm panicked. I'm trying to finish up a manuscript, and he will respond right away, and he's been a big help to me. So weevils have a new place in my eye and my heart these days. Whoops. I want to take a moment finally to thank again my wife, Paula, who's hiding over here in the corner, just out of sight, but she's right here. She's accompanied me on some of the trips in the West, but without her love and support, I never would have been able to complete this book or taken part in many of my entomological endeavors this century. I'm forever grateful for her love and support. Okay, there was some talk about BioQuip, and originally I'd hoped to have a stack of books through BioQuip to sign and promote. Things have changed a little bit within the last couple of weeks. I'm sure you are aware of this. I've known the Fall family for many years. I've been doing business with them for since 1970, and I consider them close friends. The Fall brothers were looking to retire, and there was no one in the family to pass the business along to, and they didn't find a buyer for the business. So that's where we are today. There are 2 copies left of Beetles of Western North America, and 40% has been knocked off. So the price is $27 plus tax and shipping. And I have them sitting right here with me. They are just right there where I'm pointing, gesturing. And if anyone is interested in an inscribed or autographed copy of this book, contact me directly at arthurevans@verizon.net. First come, first serve. The 2 people that email me first with the timestamp, I will forward your contact information to BioQuip directly, and they will contact you and assist you with your order. And then once I receive the paperwork, I will send the books from here. So there's no doubt that you will receive your books because they're right here in Richmond, Virginia. And on that high note, I just want to thank you all so much for sharing Beetles of Western North America with me and allowing me to share my story with you of how I came to write this book. And I thought I'd end with a sunset looking at Babakivri Peak. This is a photograph taken looking due west from the Patagonia Mountains, one of my favorite vistas anywhere in the world. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Art. That was really great. And again, if anybody has any questions, if you want to, use that little raise your hand icon, and you'll pop up to the top of the windows. We can see you. I see Matt Buffington has a question.
I think he's just applauding.
Oh, he's applauding. That's the applauding thing.
I was applauding. Great job, Art.
Thanks. Usually after all this time, it's just stunned silence, and then we just sort of drift away. So.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Did you capture any what's some of your rarest beetles that you included in your book?
Well, probably the rarest beetle that I can think of off the top of my mind is the buprestid, and it's Juniperella mirabilis. This is a very bold beetle. I don't know, I couldn't bring it up in a timely manner. But it's a very boldly colored beetle. It's associated with the juniper, big surprise. I've never collected it. And yet I grew up with it. It was all around me. People have found specimens in the juniper woodlands where I grew up. But on one of my trips to California, I got word that someone had chopped out some specimens from some juniper and had live ones. And so I just showed up on their doorstep with my camera and said, may I take some pictures? And unfortunately, it was during my slide days, so they're not my best work, but they're good enough. And I made several trips with Chuck back in the day to look for those beetles. We never found them. And I made several trips to the spot where I know they had been taken, found some other interesting things, but never those. But that's one of the rarest species that's included in the book. I tried to pick species that people were likely to find. Juniperella is a bit of a ringer. If you ran across it, you definitely notice it. There's no missing it. But I really wanted to focus on species that people were likely to find. And of course, it's trying to make that balance between including things that people will find and also trying to introduce readers to beetles that they may not be aware of, but now that they see it and know where to look, they could discover it for themselves. And ultimately, the book is driven by images. And so, we tried to get, my collaborators at Princeton University Press wanted the book to look its absolute best. So ultimately, we picked the species that we had the best photos for. All right. Like I said, stunned silence. That's okay.
There's some nice comments on the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Some really nice, fantastic work. And Matt Bertone says that he met you NCSU and
yes, Matt,
Yes.
Matt and I need to cross paths again. Matt's been very generous over the years because he's, among other things, he supplied photographs for us to use on
Oh,
the
nice.
NPR website to go along with our radio bits. And he was always quick to respond and provide a great photo. And I've always appreciated that. And a visit is long overdue. And let's see, I'm starting at the bottom here.
Yes.
I can't keep up. It's huge. I'd like to.
So I was wondering, Art, if you've noticed kind of changes in numbers of insects, like how difficult is it now maybe to find certain things as compared to earlier when you were taking images?
Well, I'm one of those people that's old enough to talk about the windshield effect. You know, I remember going on trips with my parents back in the 60s and then starting on my own in the early 70s, and remember lots of insects all over the windshield and the radiator. And I seldom have that experience anymore. It's depressing. But I will say that two of the trips I took, 2016 and 2018 in Arizona, were spectacular. It gave me hope, you know. But honestly, habitats are dwindling. A lot of my favorite haunts growing up are gone. They're gone either because of development or because of several major forest fires that occurred this century. 2009, there was a massive fire that burned from the mountains of Los Angeles almost all the way to the Mojave Desert on the other side. And my childhood home was spared, but the homes of many of my friends were not. And it was an unthinkable fire. And all those places are gone. I've only seen photographs. I haven't visited, and they look like the moon. So there is that to contend with. But I have noticed anecdotally that there seem to be fewer insects, certainly here in the East. But I will say that my experiences in southeastern Arizona were good. And I'm hopeful that Bob Anderson and I are going on what I'm calling a Beetles Across America tour this summer. We're driving out to Arizona, and I will come what may. You know, the rains have been spotty. And so that's obviously going to impact things. It's very dry in the West. So there's a lot going on. And so it's really hit and miss. I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but yes, I think things are different from the time I seriously got interested in insects in the late 1960s, early 1970s.
And there's a question from Anais regarding collecting. What's the best trap?
Yes.
The most beetles.
Yeah. Well, of course, you know, locality has a lot to do with that. You know, you can have the greatest trap and put it in a crap place, and there you are. Those traps that I highlighted in the presentation and are featured in the book will give you some ideas. The V-fit trap is amazing. Blacklight traps are good. I don't use a blacklight trap all that often. Sometimes I do. I hate killing a lot of insects that I'm not going to use. And I can't process everything to pass along to everybody. So I try to use methods where I can be selective. Sometimes I'll take quantities of things like pitfall traps, flight intercept traps. Malaise trapping is great. I mean, Malaise traps are designed for wasps and bees, but there are a lot of beetles that turn up. And if you are really ambitious, if you lay a tray down at the bottom of the partition, you'll capture a lot of beetles that normally don't go up, they go down. The V-fit trap sort of capitalizes on that and captures beetles that tend to go down. Beating is a very good method. For years, Chuck Bellamy kept twisting my arm to beat, and I just, you know, I just rather sit around a black light and let them come to me. But in my old age, I've discovered beating is a great way to go. I mean, even if you just have a few minutes, it's a great way to get a handle on what's out there right now.
Great, thank you.
Yes, the Sky Islands do have endemics. I can't even begin to go into that now, but it's a real jigsaw puzzle. There are species that show up in a couple of mountain ranges, but not in others. And they're, you know, just a few miles away or I shouldn't say a few miles, they're greater distances than that, but it's all in southeastern Arizona. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your nice comments. It's very much appreciated.
Great.
I think I've covered just about it. Yeah, we're back to ECN.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just one comment. You mentioned John Pinto. He was actually on my committee for my PhD because he was
okay.
assigned to do trichogrammatid,
Yes.
but his Meloid work was what he enjoyed the most. And I was reminiscing that his office was the very first one on the right when he
Yes.
went to the old building. And
Yep.
yeah, I spent a lot of time in his office, and he had horrendous handwriting. So I would go to get rough drafts revised by him, and he couldn't read his own comments. So it became like a joke between the two of us.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned he's the first door on the right, because that's why I wound up in his office. I think I must have been 13 or 14. I'm sure he doesn't remember me from a hole in the wall, but I sure remember him. And I remember the old tiny display cases that were out in the hallway. I mean, I still love stuff like that. But you know, to the fevered brain of a 13-year-old that's just getting started in insects, there's nothing better than that.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to going through the book. It's a great presentation and great photographs. And
Well, thank you very much. And like I say, it's first come, first serve, and I'll be sure to respond to everyone to let you know where you are. I won't leave you hanging.
I have a quick question. What if we're not one of those lucky two? How do we get your book?
You can order the book from anywhere. You can order it through your favorite bookseller. These books are not rare. I mean, I don't want to give the impression that these are the last two books out there. The printing is running out. That's not the case. You can get them from anywhere. But I'm just saying is that if you would like them signed or inscribed, I have a couple here, and I can accommodate you through BioEquip. And like I say, I've made special arrangements with them. So please don't worry that in spite of everything you've heard, that's just money down a rat hole. That's not what's going to happen. I have the books here. When I hear from them, I'll pop it in the mail and you'll have them soon. Great
talk. Thank you. Thanks for your work.
Thank you, everyone.
thank you. Okay. Well, thank you, Al, for again another great program. Thank you, Art. This is wonderful, and thanks to everyone for joining us and for attending. So
I just note, Lourdes, that we ended up with 48 participants.
Wow, that's great. That's awesome. That's wonderful. And again, if you want to catch up, look at some of the stuff that Art was saying, go back to the YouTube channel. We'll be posting the presentation there, and then you can catch up on that. And then for the next meeting, it'll be Dr. Miles Zhang, right, Al, and talking about micro wasps, like gall wasps, I suppose.
Before we go, I have to take advantage of this opportunity. I see a young entomologist here, the Yoder-Danowitz family. Can you unmute and introduce yourselves? You're new to me anyway.
Hi.
Hello, what's your name?
My name's Alistair, and this is my mom.
Hi. We're sideways now. Sorry about that.
I can fix that.
That's okay. Have we met before? You look familiar. I was wondering if you had shown up to one of my other.
Alistair's been a member of the ESW for about 2 years, or maybe a little.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, forgive me, but like I say, among all these older, more grizzled faces, it's nice to see some young folks out there. We need more like you. So,
thank you for your talk. It was gorgeous.
Thank you. Invite your friends.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this reminds me as well that we have the Young Entomologist group that is linked to the Entomological Society of Washington, and with David Adamski's work, and he takes the kids out and they go collecting, and they have a really nice program. So hopefully at some point he can give us a little presentation on that. But it's a nice group of kids who are interested in insects and collecting in the region. So it's great. Yeah.
Well, that's great, because it's really important, and that's in part what I'm trying to do with these books, is try and inspire those that are well into it, as well as encourage a new generation or two to get started.
No, this is great. Yeah, sure. And I like seeing all of the your trajectory, you know, that's always interesting to me, how people get into it, and knowing that you started with the 4-H program, which is, I've heard of a lot of kids who have just amazing collections with 4-H. So.
Well, and just the chance meetings, you know, I mean, for years, I thought I was the only person interested in insects on the planet. And Chris Henney changed all that for me by putting me in touch with the museum, and things just kind of took off from there in many different directions at once. Yep.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, thanks again. And thanks to everyone. So do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
Yep, great. Okay, so I'll see you next month, and thanks again for joining. Meeting's adjourned.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Art.
Take care.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Yeah. You can stop the recording, maybe.
Oh, yeah.